Hello and welcome everyone. It's so nice to see you here the week of Christmas. I am very impressed that many of you are so dedicated that you came back even with Christmas looming so closely. So thank you for your time. We have a great lineup today. Jacob Small will be talking a bit about understanding list and level when he'll be showing you how to process data effectively. So we'll be getting to that in just a minute. But while we are waiting for everyone to join and get their audio and visual working, let's go ahead and find out where you are coming in from. So if you could go ahead and open up that questions panel and type in the Q&A panel where you are coming from. All right, we see Raiders from Orlando. Merry Christmas to you too, Raiders. George from Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm getting a message that something needs to be installed. 1 second, let me get rid of this message. Of course, everything wants to install when we're in the middle of something, right? Just how it goes. Okay, let me come back to here. Okay, we got rid of that message, good. All right, so Molly is coming in from Indiana, Joseph from Georgia, Kristen from Norman, Oklahoma, Andrew from Alberta, Tara from Vancouver, Joseph from Michigan, Novi, nice to have you. Alexander is coming from Brooklyn, New York, excellent. Another Vancouver, so we've got Ron from Vancouver, Jason from Seattle, Washington, Ryan from Upper Michigan. I apologize if I say your names wrong. Finne Lee from Toronto. Michael from Maryland, great. Excellent, it's so nice to have all of you with us. I hope you're all enjoying some nice weather. I had the opportunity yesterday to go skating. It was beautiful here in Utah. It looks like we've got Arpit from Alexandria, David from Denver, John from Georgia, Luke from Montana, Bill from Tacoma, Washington. Excellent. All right, we still have a few people coming in, so I'm going to give everyone just another minute or two to get logged in, get everything working right. CJ from Nashville, excellent. Akash from Connecticut. Let's see, we've got Gregory from Tulsa, Oklahoma. All right. And it looks like Jacob might be having just a little bit of trouble getting logged in, so I'm going to give him another minute. While he's finishing logging in, I am going to go ahead and go through some orders of business. So let me make sure you're seeing my screen okay. Yes, it looks like you are. Whoops. Okay, so just really quickly, there it goes. It didn't look like it was changing. So I'll go through the safe harbor statement. I'm not going to read it to you. Basically, what it says is if we make any forward-looking statements during this broadcast, please do not make any purchasing decisions based on those forward-looking statements. Only make decisions based on what is in the software today. And so today we'll be talking quite a bit about Dynamo, and you know, we don't want to make any promises or you to buy based on promises that we might make. Before we begin, as usual, your lines are muted. This is just to reduce the background noise to make sure that the recording that we're doing comes out very nice. And so, you know, once the session is over, the recording will be processed and we will be emailing that out to everyone. So again, your mics are muted just to help make sure that's a nice, clean recording. However, if you do have questions, please do put those in the Q&A panel, or you can raise your hand in the attendee panel so that I can unmute your line and let you ask your question live. All right, so one last thing. I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when we met, but for those of you that didn't make it to that session, I do want to let you know that the group network has decided to take on these meetups. And the reason for that is we really want to make sure that you are provided the best community experience possible. And so the group network is a network of global network user groups, developer groups, and online groups. This allows you to connect and learn from others, build relationships, and share your own knowledge. And so they will be taking over these meetups. And so that means that in January, we'll be taking a short break to give them time to regroup and think about how they can provide the best integrated community experience and better connect you with user groups in your community. So I'll be putting some links up in the chat panel to let you know where to look for information after January on how to get back into these meetups. We'll be posting that information in the Community Dojo. Again, I'll put that link in the chat panel. And if you would like recordings, to watch any of the recordings of our past meetups, I'll put that in the chat panel as well. And that's on our Customer Success Learning Hub is where you can find those recordings. So I'll put all of that up in the chat panel. And with that, Jacob, it's nice to see you're here. I'm going to go ahead and make you presenter so that you can start to introduce the topic.
Thanks.
Okay, there you go.
All right. You guys should be seeing a screen about list levels working with complex data.
Yep, that's what we're looking at.
Awesome. Hopefully my microphone's coming through okay. It sounds like I might be on speaker, but I can't manage to make it change. If there's any audio issues, let me know and we can take a break and I can try and resolve that. But for now, let's just get going.
Yep, it sounds good on my side, so I think you're good.
Awesome. All right, so today we're talking all about list levels. My name is Jacob Small. I'm a designated support specialist focusing on generative design and BIM, which is a really long title that means I help customers and EBAs, some of our largest accounts, adopt Dynamo, Revit, generative design for Revit, BIM 360 design, and similar applications kind of at a high level, right? I do show this slide during every one of these presentations. It's a lot of words, but effectively, basically breaks down to just, if I make statements regarding coming product functionality, go ahead and don't use that to let that stir your purchasing or drive your purchasing decisions. You want to make those purchasing decisions based on the capabilities in the product today. So we've got a quick, about 15-minute presentation today on list levels, and then we're going to get into questions and answers after that. And so list levels are actually a really, really important thing. You guys may remember this from the last session, right? Hopefully we do, right? The idea here is to take a list of items, right? The list of colors, and then a list of animals, and then join those two together and basically result in larger lists of colored animals, right? The Dynamo graph to actually build that's right here. We're going to go ahead and rebuild a portion of that graph today so that we can actually play with the list levels as well. So if you don't quite remember this, don't worry. But we did eventually modify that graph a little bit further so that we could get here. And this is really what we were kind of after in the end. Instead of sorting the animals by color, we wanted to sort the animals by animal type, right? So how do we actually get there, right? What does that lacing be? Well, it winds up there isn't a lacing to get there. And instead, what you can do is you can manipulate that list further, right? So we look at this graph. This is the list transpose also from a while back. Basically what this node does, the list transpose node that you see right here, is going to take your rows and turn them into columns, and your columns and turn them into rows. Okay? Really, really useful node, but it is additional nodes on canvas, right? So the big difference here is how do I go from sort of this sort of layout to that sort of layout without having to have the computer do all the work that you're seeing sort of drawn out here with these arrows, right? There's a lot to do in terms of manipulating that data, specifically when you get into really big models, really complex projects with lots of stuff, right? Not great to have all that extra computation happening on. So don't worry, we can actually do better. So with list levels, what we're going to do is we're going to, instead of say, take the whole list and mix it with the whole list, we're actually going to be able to very specifically come in and say, work with the content at level 1. If we take a moment and step back and remember what those Dynamo graphs, Dynamo lists look like, every different item in this list, every box I've put in this list sort of highlights those different levels, right? If you go back and look at the previous sessions where we first got into lists, it sort of had those that slide with the arrows that went straight down and then sort of showed you what level each one of these is at. But the big thing to remember here is we've got our stuff at level 1 in a green box, at level 2 in a red box, at level 3 in a blue box, right? Now we can tell a given Dynamo node to use a specific list level by hitting that little chevron sign to the right of the input, which will pop up this pop-up window right here, where we can then say to use levels and keep list structure if needed. Once we do that, we're going to see this little icon pop up in between our variable name and the chevron sign. We can then use these arrows, the up and down arrows that I've sort of highlighted there, to either go up a level within our list structure or down a level in the list structure. What this means, if we go back to our animals, mixing them with colors, we can look at the individual animals, right? We've got them circled there at level 1, and we've got our other list at level 2. By saying at level 1, the list is going to perform differently. When Dynamo goes ahead and starts to mix those two pieces together, it's going to only see this. And because it only sees that with auto lacing, it's going to say, okay, auto, I've got a singleton. That means I want to work with longest lacing. So I'm going to take red and elephant and mix those two together, get a red elephant, orange and elephant, get an orange elephant, yellow elephant, green elephant, blue elephant, purple elephant, and we get all the list of elephants. Well, Dynamo's not really going to stop there, right? Dynamo's also going to say, well, there's other data in here because there's another thing at level 1. Okay, so it's going to go back to the original list and it's going to say, I've got a fish. All right, auto, that's going to default to longest lacing. We've got a red, we've got an orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. We're going to mix it with the fish. We're going to get our red fish, orange fish, yellow fish, green fish, blue fish, purple fish. And in the end, because Dynamo still remembers that it calculated that other piece, we're still going to have our list of elephants as well. All right, let's try and build that up. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to launch Dynamo Sandbox. Pardon me while this thinks for a minute. Here we go. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to start a new node. We're going to go through all of this exercise again because it's, again, a great learning exercise. This is one of those amazing toy problems where we can really learn a lot by just sort of pulling it apart. So we're going to start by placing a string node on the canvas. I'm going to right-click and search for string. Helps if you spell it. There we go. And then I've got 6 colors, so I'm going to paste those all 6 in there. 3, 4. There we go. And I'm going to start typing up the colors. Red, orange, yellow, green. I'm putting that space at the end because we're going to be working with just the strings here. Blue, and then I'm going to use a list.create node. Okay, and this list create node, it's going to allow me to basically join all these items instead of treating them individually as one single item. And that way I can process things much, much faster and keep my graphs much more organized. All right, from here, we're going to come in and we're going to add a addition node and a few more string nodes. First animal is elephant. Second animal is fish. Another list create node. And there we have it. So now with standard lacing, right, setting this to auto, not changing my list levels. You can see I've got a red elephant and an orange fish. We'll put a watch note on here just to make this a little bit easier to preview. And now we can start to get a little bit more complex. All right, so if we think back to the way that I'd sort of work this out, we said we're going to work with the list levels at level 1 on the animals, right? The elephant and the fish. We quickly pop back over here. I'm going to come over here. The animals list is our Y input. So I'm going to hit this chevron sign. And then we're going to say use levels. And it defaults to level 2. Now I can go up a level. That's not helping me many, but it can be really useful to do that because you can add an additional depth in your data structure, which sometimes you want. In this case, I actually want to go down a couple levels though. And notice what happened when I did that. And again, the reason for this is it's going to treat these pieces as individual, but not stop working through the list until it's got all of those different pieces processed. All right. And the really great thing about this is with that sort of setup, we can have even more complex list levels. So if I had another list create to take another elephant fish, notice it's going to process the elephant, then the fish, then the next elephant, then the next fish. Now this does, in this case, flatten things all the way out. Let's change these two animals. If anybody wants to put another animal in the chat, I'll go ahead and I'll type that one in. But the first one I'm going to use is anteater. Okay, nothing in the chat at the moment. We'll do.
Actually, one just came in. How about a kangaroo?
Kangaroo.
Thanks, Kristen, by the way.
Thank you. I'm really bad at coming up with animals off the top of my head. So. All right, so now I've got elephant, fish, anteater, kangaroo, and we've got our list structure like this. So now when we process this through, notice I've got my elephant, my fish, my anteater, because it's coming into this level and it's saying, get me the item at level 1 and get me all the items at level 1. Just keep going, don't stop, right? This is basically forcing Dynamo to look at the list a very specific way until it starts to process the content, okay? So the other sort of advantage here, and the other thing that we can do that we haven't talked about yet, is force that list structure, okay? What that is, if I come back here, I can maintain the previous structure. And when I hit this, notice what happened to my list structure. I now have 4 levels on my list, right? I've got my first list here, which is the original list for all of this stuff, right? Then I've got this list, which contains my elephants. Outside of that, we've got the list that contains the elephant and the fish, right? We've added 1 level to the depth to attain sort of all the lists that we mixed with it, but it does allow us to sort of more quickly get that content processed through. Now, a common application of this, let's say you guys had a list of files or list of values that you wanted to set from Excel into Revit elements, right? We've got 300 different parameters that we want to set on for 500 different walls, or maybe it's 5 parameters that you want to set on 600 walls, or whatever it is. You could place an element set parameter value by name for every parameter, right? 5, maybe that's attainable. 300, you're going to go insane, right? Instead, you can handle all that data as one list and then just use list levels to make sure that it's processing the data for each of those pieces individually correctly. It is a little bit more complex because you've got that third input there, but it's definitely something that can be done. All right, let's pop back over into the presentation. All right, so we showed this stuff. Actually, this is the end of the presentation. This is the end of the slide decks that I had prepared for today. So do we have any questions in the chat yet? If not, we can try and pop over and give a Revit example of this.
We do not have any questions, but if you do have questions, definitely feel free to raise your hand and ask it live or type it in the question panel.
All right, let me go ahead. I'm going to quickly list over this. We usually do this a little bit later, but while you guys might be typing up whatever questions you have, quick rundown our learning resources. So we've got our basic Dynamo information and news can be found at dynamobim.org. Do want to highlight the blog there, dynamobim.org.blog. That's kind of like where all the fun new stuff is, great examples of stuff that different use cases and things like that you might see from people. I do recommend checking that out. We just put a post up there for Dynamo 2.10 Sandbox, which is what I was using today, which has some great new features for sort of intelligent search based on the given node that you have. So what kind of stuff could I feed into that stuff, which is pretty cool. Also, if you need to download different versions of Dynamo, including Dynamo Sandbox 2.10, you can do that through dynamobuilds.com. Now remember, Sandbox does not have any interaction with Revit or other sort of integrations. So this is just something you can play with Dynamo kind of in a standalone environment, but it's definitely worth getting to learn and a great learning tool to actually be able to leverage in your Revit content as well. Also point out the Dynamo GitHub, which is where you can go to interact with the Dynamo development team and see stuff that isn't even released yet, because that is their active development locations, which is really cool. To get started with learning Dynamo, I do recommend going through the exercises in the Dynamo primer. Don't skip anything. It's not about the outcome. That's not what you're after. Instead, you want to focus entirely on sort of managing the methods that are used to achieve the outcome, right? We also have our Dynamo BIM forums, which is where you can go to interact with the larger Dynamo community and ask questions and get help with problems that you might run into. The Dynamo Dictionary has examples of using all the different basic nodes that are out there, pretty much every one that comes out of the box from Autodesk. And then we have dynamonodes.com for the ones that are in packages and sort of non-standard content. Right. Design script links to if you wanted to learn the code language that runs under the hood inside Dynamo, and also some links there for Dynamo Python if you wanted to learn a little bit more about Revit interactivity or just Python interactivity within Dynamo, and then some information on generative design. We'll plug the generative design primer in particular on those links. That's kind of the easiest way to get started with generative design, because it's got some great sort of examples you can follow through. Again, don't skip anything. It's not about the outcome. It's about the methods used to achieve it. Do we have any questions yet, Michelle?
We do. We have Kent asking, is it possible to use levels when you're using design script?
Yes, you can. That's a great question. So I'm going to pop back over here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to copy these nodes just so that we can see it. And if you're like me and you're asking about design script, you probably know a little bit about design script, but maybe not yet everything. The easiest way to learn how to use any given feature of Dynamo with design script is to just let Dynamo do the work for you. So that design script being the code that runs under the hood, we can let Dynamo say, just expose that code to me. So I'm going to highlight this particular node, and you can do this with most nodes that are available. Right-click on your background, and then say node to code. Now it's important you click on the background, otherwise you're going to get your node context click instead of your graph context click. But when I do this, and we hit node to code, all right, now we are seeing a bug here. Right? And I should have thought this through before I did this particular example. The add method is not available in Dynamo 2.10. The Dynamo team had to make some adjustments there. Let's try changing this out for a plus, and then I think that should, yeah, there we go. So if you do see that add issue, that is something the Dynamo team has found and has already got a fix out. So it's just going to be a matter of getting another release out there. All right. So to tell it to work at a given level, it's that at sign. If I wanted to not maintain my list levels when we force the not tame my list structure, when we force the list level, it's a single @ sign. If you want to keep that list structure, it's a double @ sign. And in all cases, once you start to get specific about your list level, right? So it's at and then level 1. When you do that, you also have to start to manage your replication manually, right? So this is saying basically longest lacing by putting that bracket in carets like that. Solomore's Dynamo design script presentation has some more detailed examples of that, but hopefully that answered the question for you today.
Okay, so if you do have questions, please definitely put those in the Q&A panel or raise your hand and I can unmute your line to ask that question live.
Cool. All right, well, while people come up with some other questions, let me see if I can get Revit to launch here, and we'll try a Revit example of setting parameter values.
Thanks. Okay, it looks like Fred is raising his hand. Let me go ahead and unmute. Oh, did you disappear, Fred? Okay, Fred Hendricks, I saw you raise your hand, but I'm unmuting your line. Let's see if you can unmute yourself and ask that question live. Oh, okay. All right. It looks like Don has a question. Using a laptop without a graphics card, the rectangle.xy isn't available. Do you have any advice for Don?
Yeah, if you're using a laptop without a graphics card, you're going to have a few different issues. The first one being you're not going to see any of your background preview. Dynamo does really need a graphics card in order to work well. The second issue that you may start to see is there are actually, if you're not even seeing the node show up. Like in your library, do you have a geometry menu?
Let me see if I can unmute Don and so we can have a conversation back and forth. Okay, Don, I have unmuted you. Let's see if you can unmute on your end. Don Luther? Oh, okay, so he typed in the panel, node shows up, mic is not available. Okay, no problem.
All right. So the node shows up in your geometry, like you have the node in your geometry, but you're not seeing anything in the background?
Correct.
Okay.
Oops.
Yeah. You really do need a graphics card in order to get Dynamo geometry to work. There have been some people who've sort of forced the issue and made it happen, but the Dynamo team hasn't really tested it in that environment. So you might get it to work for a little bit and then it'll disappear. There was a great forum thread about that, which you can basically search Dynamo on the Dynamo BIM forums. Something like Intel graphics or no graphics card, and you might see a few people who sort of managed to make it work. But again, it's not really a supported environment, so you're going to see some issues with stuff as you go along. Hopefully that made some sense. And sorry about that. It is one of those things where it can feel like a bit of a gotcha moment when that comes through.
Yeah. All right, and it looks like Fred is asking, is there any AutoCAD applications?
Yes, there's actually a lot. You can actually leverage Dynamo with Civil 3D. directly. So if you've got, actually it's not just Civil 3D, Civil 3D or Advanced Steel directly. So if you've got access to either of those AutoCAD verticals, you can launch that way. Once you're in sort of the Civil 3D environment, you open the DWG you want to process, open Dynamo for Civil 3D or Dynamo for Advanced Steel. If you have Advanced Steel, you can do this as well, and then start to manipulate that content. If you don't have that, it's a little bit more difficult. I don't have it installed anywhere at the moment, but there's a package called Link DWG, which will allow you to manipulate Dynamo from, the active AutoCAD instance from whatever Dynamo version you're in. So if you're in Dynamo for Revit, you can manipulate the open DWG in your other AutoCAD environment. It is a little bit less stable because of the core technology it involves. The documentation is a little bit difficult to get to work with, but it's definitely doable. In either case, I would recommend the Civil 3D version though. It's going to be like 1,000 times more stable. And if you've got the AEC collection, you should be able to launch that, I believe. All right, so I do have an example sort of queued up here. Michelle, do we have any other questions in the chat?
Nope, none at the moment.
All right, so we'll get started with this. So you can see I've got 4 walls here, right? These 4 different walls, let's say I wanted to set a comment and a mark for each one of those pieces based on some external data or some other method that I've sort of worked up. So when I'm working in Dynamo Revit, I do this a lot. I like to split my screen where I can see Dynamo on one side of the monitor and my Revit environment in the other, and then I'll often go full screen with Dynamo once I start to go a little bit further. But it does mean I do like to minimize my properties palette a little bit, minimize my library palette quite a bit, just so I have a little bit more working space. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select some model elements. Come in here, and that's going to allow me to do box selection, right? So just like within Revit, if I go left to right, I've got to completely encompass whatever wall it is that I'm after. If I go right to left, I can do a cross. So once I get all 4 of those things selected, we need now 4 new mark values. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to make a range from, we'll do design script for this, 1.4, right? And I know 4 because I know it's 4 walls, but if I didn't, I could use a list.count. And then instead of 4, we could use a variable here. Let's call this n. Start at 1, go to n, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then we're going to do another plus here, just like we did before. And then I'm going to type a string. And I'm doing this in a code block, which means I have to incorporate the quotation marks as well as the semicolon at the end of the list there. And now when I join these 2 together, wall number, oh, look at that. Let's put a colon and a space, wall number 1 through 4. And then let's set a comment value as well. So here, whoops, a bit big with my copy there. And I'm going to put that modified on piece right there as well. Okay, so now I'm going to look to set the parameter value for those particular elements. So I'm going to come up into Revit, under Elements, Element. So I'm working with an element. Most things in Revit is an element, so we can do a lot of stuff in our Elements menu. You can see there's this set parameter value by name node, right? I'm going to go big on my Dynamo node because it's getting a little bit difficult in terms of the amount of stuff that's on there. So this takes an element as the first input, a parameter name, and a value. Well, let's first take our parameter name of mark. We're going to use a string node for this. and then another parameter named for comments. Let's just see if we can confirm, do these pieces have a mark and a comment, right? So one way we can do that is you can come over here and look in the parameters for the active element itself. Remember, just like in Revit, if we want to set up a type property, we have to go in here and edit type. You're going to have to do the same thing if you want to set a type property in Dynamo. The other way we can do this is we can take an item out of the list, and then we can say, element, what are your parameters with an element.parameters node. And this is a list of every parameter that that element has, everything that I can modify about that element by just feeding a new value, right? So it's got its category, it's got its base offset, its area, image length, right? All this different stuff. Now, some of these are going to be read-only, right? I can't set the length, I can't change the category, but it does store that parameter for us, which is really good. So you can see there is a comments with an S parameter, and there is a mark, no S. I'm going to create a quick list.create to pull the two names of my parameters together, give myself a little bit more room, and then it's going to ask for a value. So now I need a list of these items and these items. Let's actually modify this. I want to have a whole list here. So 22 ... minus n. And Dynamo's not able to run because I've got a Revit command active. What is happening? Looks like Revit is in the midst of forcing me to quit. Sorry about this, guys. Let me save this and see what happens.
While Jacob is getting Revit to do what he wants, does anyone have any additional questions? You can type it in the question panel or raise your hand. So it looks like Dawn is asking, can you go over using the pound sign when using range in a code block?
Absolutely. That's an easy one we can cover while that builds up. So the basic syntax of building up a range in a code block is what number you want to start at, 2 dots, what number you want to end at, 2 dots, and what number you want to step by, right? So now I can use some numbers. Let's start at 0, end at 12, step by 2. Right? And I don't have to put those in as variables, right? I can put them in as, hard-coded numbers if I want to. Notice if I say end at 11, but I don't get there based on my step, it's not going to include that last number. What I could do instead, if I knew I wanted to end at a given number, but I knew how many steps I wanted, we could use a pound sign right here. And this is now, instead of going to say start end, it's now going to be start end count, right? And we do have to have that pound sign in there, that hashtag sign in there. And this is a count of 2. More likely, instead of a count, we would want to say end minus start divided by step, right? And now I can come back with my step, end minus start, 11 minus 0 divided by step, is going to give me making sure I step more or less as close as it could to by that count. Actually, my formula is off there. There we go. That looks a little bit better. So it's going to be as close to stepping by 2 as possible in this example, right? Because we've set that rounding. So that's the first method. The second method is how many do I want to have? And that's again coming back here and changing end to count, right? So this is saying start at 0, count 11 times by 2, right? And that gets me all the way up to 20. Okay. If I change this number to 3, we're going to count by 3s instead, get me up to 30. If I change this number to 4, we're going to only have 4 items in the list instead of 11. So this is basically saying, how many do you want? All right, so this is back open. Did that answer the question well for you?
Yes, Stone says yes.
Awesome. Any other questions, feel free to throw them at me while I finish opening Dynamo up here.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like Vincent is asking, how do you compare a linked Revit model parameter value to an existing model parameter value?
So if we wanted to compare a value of a wall, let's say I had this wall in a link and I wanted to compare the mark on the wall in the link to the mark on the wall in my model. What I'd have to do is I'd have to get the linked element out of the link. Genus Loki has some great notes for that. Archilab has some notes for that. Bimorph has some notes for that. There's a dozen different ways. I think Rhythm and Clockwork have some notes for that too. A dozen different ways to sort of start to expose those linked elements so you can work with the actual element itself. You can't work with the link holistically, right? Your link object is one thing, but then we have some additional pieces inside the link, and that's really what we're after. Once you have those two, you can start to compare the two pieces. Now, the key piece is, how do I know which ones I want to compare, right? Because if I say, get me this wall and get me that wall, there's no guarantee that unless you're manually selecting those two pieces, that you're comparing the right values or the two right elements. So a lot of times what you'll wind up doing is using the GUID, the globally unique identifier, to sort of make those two pieces consistent. But you do have to select the element in the link rather than the element in the model itself, or the link model itself. All right, so you can see here 22 minus n is going to go ahead and give me the values from 22 to 18. We can also say 22 minus 1 number n. And this is probably more likely what we're after. Whoop. 22 number n minus 1. My bad. There we go. 22, 21, 2019, and then we can just use the same plus node that we've used before a couple times now to join those two strings. 1222, 1221, 1220, 1219, and then we'll bring this guy in here. All right, so now we've got the list of all the values that we want to join up in one list, and then we've got the list of the marks and the comments. And now let's go ahead and let's wire our elements in, and let's see what happens. We're going to watch the mark in the comment field, right? These two fields right here that happen to be next to each other. That was intentional on my part for once. Here we go. And now I'm going to hit run, and it only pulled through the wall number, right? Why is that? Well, we've got a list levels and lacing issue going on here, right? So what we want to do is we want to try and adjust those list levels. Now, one thing that's going to be pretty tough is the way I have these set up. I've got mark comments, and then over here, I've got, whoa, if I set that as my mark, that as my comment, we're good, but it's not sort of paired up by the element. Let's try a list.transpose. Turn these guys around. All right, that's looking a little bit better, but what do we get over here? Still the same content. Let's set this down to at level 1, that to at level 2. All right, modified on 1221, we're getting a little bit closer. Let's set this at level 2 as well, and let's see how that runs. Wall number 1 on 1222, 1221, 1221, nothing and nothing. We're starting to get there. I'm going to take this, I'm going to clear these values out. And now we're going to say lacing to longest. 1 on 1222, 2 on 1221, 3 on 1220, 4 on 1219. Right? So the same order that they were sort of grouped up all seem to work. And again, that's just a matter of changing that list level and lacing. Okay, it wouldn't matter if I had 300 parameters, as long as I had 300 sets of values here, we'd be good to go. Right? So that's a fairly classic example of when you'll need to make use of list levels and lacing, with some added code block fun in there as well. Cool. Any other questions?
Not yet. So if you do have questions, definitely type them in. Oh, Heather just sent one in. So Heather is saying, we have common issue with Revit warnings saying elements have duplicate mark values. This is usually coming from our many light fixtures placed in the model. Can I use a similar method to change all these mark values to be different?
Yes. Yes, you absolutely could. So let's take an example of that. I'm going to minimize this. We'll maximize this back up. I'm going to copy these walls so that we've got many. And I'm going to highlight them all. I'm going to change all my comments to the letter A, or all my marks to the letter A. Elements have duplicate mark values. So now I have the warning which you have, right? All right, so there's a couple different ways you can do this. I do recommend looking into the Archilab package, which has some great nodes for working with warnings. You can also just export out your list of warnings to HTML, use Dynamo to parse the HTML and get the elements in question. The Archilab one's probably a little bit more user-friendly. So I'm going to take all of these guys, pull Revit off to one side once again, and we'll zoom extend on those. I'm going to do, whoop, this is the wrong Dynamo. I'm going to do a save on this, and we're going to go ahead and say new. And then once again, we're going to say select our model elements. Element.parameters. I'm going to pull out the first item from the list. I'm going to use some design script for this. Right, so this gets me just one, and this is using my indexing. By putting it in the brackets like that, it's saying the item at index 1. So if I pulled open this list, it's just going to pull that 355797, 355797. There we go. And then let's look at what the parameters are, just so that, and again, I do this just so I know how the parameter that I'm after is really spelled. Element.get parameter value by name. Let's look to make sure that these all have the same mark value. All of these have the mark A. Let's change some of these so that these have B. Okay, so now you can see I've got some A's, some B's. They're kind of shuffled all over the place, which isn't great. I really would prefer if they were grouped by their piece. We're going to do some list manipulation, right? So there's actually a node called list.groupByKey, which is under the organize section of our list library. This is going to take a list of items. We're going to go back to our raw elements and allow us to group it by whatever key we want. And now you can see I've got sublists, right? Sublists are great. This means I've added some additional structure to my data. right? So now that these items are grouped by whatever their mark is, and we can confirm that by dragging this over here as well. And when I do the drag copy, that's just me hitting Control on my keyboard. But you can see I've got all my A's and then all my B's. All right, let's say I wanted to add a new value onto the end of that. We're going to start at 1, then we're going to go to N. We'll use a list.count. Here we go. Let's count these items. There's 2. I probably don't want to work with just the 2 though. I probably want to work down here. How do we fix that? List levels. Use levels right there. 4 and 4. Now we've got 8, right? 1 through 4, 1 through 4. Now let's join. We're going to put our suffix number at the end of our letters. I don't need to worry about lacing here because everything's kind of a matching list structure, right? Set parameter value by name. Here's my list of elements. Here's my values. And again, everything's always in that 2D list structure, so don't have to worry so much about that. The last piece I need is this. Mark's no longer highlighted for all of these. B1, B3, B2, B4, A1, A2, A3, A4. Now the order on those is the order of the element IDs, which is the order that they were theoretically created in the database. That might not be the order you want to use. Maybe it is, but in any case, the original question was, can I not have a warning? And sure enough, there's no longer a warning associated with that element. You want to be a lot smarter than just appending a 1, 2, 3, or 4 to the end of that, though, likely. Hopefully that answered that question.
Yes, thank you, Heather says. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. Now's your chance to get any questions in. You can ask them in the Q&A panel or raise your hand and I'll unmute your line to ask live. All right, we've got a compliment here. It says, Jacob, good job explaining Dynamo. We have Civil 3D package. Do we need to buy Dynamo?
No, Dynamo is free and open source. If you have Civil 3D as your primary authoring tool, just go into manage.autodesk.com and you can get the Dynamo for Civil 3D installer there. That's the only one that's sort of deployed out differently from the others.
Great. And for those of you that are using Civil 3D, Stephen had asked the question, can you use Civil 3D, or could we give you some examples of how to use Dynamo with Civil 3D? And so I posted in there for everyone to see a link to 3 courses that we have out on our Customer Success Learning Hub that are completely free, and you can try the examples in those courses yourselves.
Yeah, one thing I've given a demo a few times for a good Civil 3D example of, could I set the layer of trees on a site based on their distance to a building, right? So when you're doing a development, you want to get rid of all the trees that are within X feet of where you're going to put the building, and all the trees that are within X feet or on the roadway or in the building too. Maybe not. Maybe you want to build around the building. I don't know. But typically you want to just get rid of them. And so one thing that you can do, it's a pretty fun graph to write. It's pretty simple, is write a graph that basically says, get me the shape of the roadway, get me the shape of the building, get me all trees that are within 5 feet, 10 feet, whatever that distance is that you want to get rid of, or pull back the trees on, and then just go ahead and set those trees to the trees on in that distance to the demo layer, and set everything that's not within that distance to the existing to remain layer. It works out really, really well, and would have saved me a ton of time back when I was practicing. So it's one of those things that, like, man, I wish I had this tool back in the day. But yeah, it's a pretty good one, and it's a pretty good learning graph too.
Excellent. David asked the question, are there any plans to continue this series and eventually get into generative design? So Jacob, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, we've got to meet with the group network to figure out when and how. But when I started this series, I said I want to make sure we get through everything. I think Michelle can probably vouch for this. I had a list. At one point, Sol had to talk me back. I had like 700 things that I wanted to cover with you guys. And he helped me sort of rein in my crazy. We got it down to a good list before we get into generative. But in a perfect world, yeah, I think we would continue this out and get into generative and kind of at a high level. In the meantime, if you're looking to get into generative, I would recommend checking out the AU sessions. I put together a course, shameless self plug, generative design at Hogwarts, which was presented with Alexandra Nelson from Perkins Eastman, who's equally amazing and really, really talented. So definitely go check that out. There's also a great course from Paulo Serra and Raquel Bastiones Recchio, which was generative design for the non-nerd or something like that. But all the AU content this year, Lily gave a great course on it as well, Lily Smith. But all the generative design content at AU this year was really, really good at sort of tackling it from more of an introductory level, like walk me through the concept rather than here's a total graph, look at all this amazing stuff you can do, which I think that's where we sort of failed previously in getting people to adopt this. It's like we're throwing people in the deep end before. There was a intentional effort to sort of teach you guys how to swim at the shallow end of the pool this year, for those who don't already know it, which was really good.
Yeah, excellent. All right, well, we are at time. One quick little comment here. Karen says, great examples. I'd like to watch this again more closely. Luckily, this was recorded, so a recording will be sent out to you. Someone else asked for that page of links that Jacob was showing earlier, all the different learning paths and different places you can go to learn Dynamo. And so that will go out with the recording. So Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know at Autodesk we are shut down this week. And so thank you, Jacob, for taking the time in your time off to do this presentation. And thank all of you for joining us the week of Christmas, and maybe you're off as well and just decided to join us. So we're thankful that you decided to spend an hour with us when we know your time is very valuable. So thank you, everyone. You have a fabulous holiday, whatever holiday you celebrate. And we'll see you back here next year.
Thanks, everyone.